This is a Wasser 10 AKM. This is pretty much the most common rifle in the world. Maybe not in the US, but amongst the rest of the world. You go to any Warzone, you're probably going to see a fair amount of these. This is not technically an AK-47, this is an AKM, which, if you don't know the difference, basically in 1947, Mikhail Kalashnikov designed the AK-47 rifle. It had a milled receiver, which means they took a block of steel and milled out the inside so they could make way for the trigger grouping and the bolt and everything, and then they put everything on top of that. The AKM came out a couple years later to modernize the design just a hair and make it a little bit easier and cheaper to manufacture. So the AKMs went with a stamped receiver, which means they took a flat piece of metal and stamped it into the shape that it needs to be. It's not quite as reliable, but it's a whole lot cheaper and easier to produce, which is why they went to that. And the AKM, when you see an AK-47 in movies, in news articles or whatever, 90% of the time it's an AKM, because that's the one that was produced the most, and that's the one that was really, really mass-produced. So an actual true AK-47s are kind of actually pretty rare. But the AKM is what really cemented the reputation. If you want to know how to identify it, usually the surefire sign is that the the muzzle brake has this little slant at the top of it. It's supposed to help with recoil just a hair. The original AK-47s didn't have that. But the AKMs do, so it's kind of an easy way to identify, though not 100% of the time. AKMs usually, or AK-47s or milled receiver AKs usually have a milled out thing right here, so you can tell it's milled right there by that. You can also tell it's a milled receiver or a stamped receiver because of the rivets on the back that hold the front and rear trunnions in, so that the gun doesn't fall apart. And other than that, there's not a whole lot of other things you can tell. This one specifically is a Romanian Wasser 10 imported by Century Arms. These guns were kind of a hit or miss when they were imported, and people had problems with them and people didn't have problems with them. I had some quality control issues a decade or so ago, I think. I don't know about when this gun was made. It was made in around 2015, 2016 probably. I bought it new in 2016, so who knows when it was. Probably made only maybe a year before that. Either way, I think that regardless if they are hit or miss, I can't really say much to that, because in terms of this specific rifle, it has been absolute hit. I've put a lot of rounds through this in the time that I've owned it, and I'm pretty sure I've never had a gun failure, like a gun-related failure. I've had magazines that conked out on me and had problems loading into the gun and things like that. But in terms of an actual, gun issue, I've not had a single one of them. But it's definitely upholding the AK-47 reputation of absolutely indestructible, which is kind of interesting now. Nowadays, a lot of modern AR-15s are relatively just as reliable, but the difference is it's not quite as reliable even on the higher ends. But this is a middle kind of the shelf AK-47. It's not super expensive, not the worst AK you can get, but it's also not the best. Even with that, it's super, super reliable. Now, again, some of these had quality control issues, so I don't know how well that works across the board for these kinds of rifles. But at the end of the day, if you buy a $600 AK compared to a $600 AR, AK is gonna be more reliable. Other than that, though, the AK is a pretty archaic design. A lot of people are used to it, but it's very different than modern rifles. Modern rifles have bolt hold opens and buttons all on the side that do all sorts of different cool things. This one, simple. You have a little lever here that releases the magazine. You have a rock and lock magazine design, so you kind of take these lips here on the end of the magazine and you kind of stick them in between right there, so that they're kind of like holding the front of the magwell, and then you rock it back, and that's in. Not the best design in the world, but it's what a lot of guns used back in the day, like the FAL and other designs like that, and the M14. But the AK did that, and the safety selector switch is also kind of archaic. It's very simple. It's just a little thing that comes in here and blocks the trigger from being able to be pressed down internally, and also covers up the dust port. Not a very great design, I'm gonna be honest with you, because unless you have really long fingers, you really can't reach up there without taking your hand physically off of the handguard or the grip to actually disengage or engage the safety. A lot of variants on the AK sought to fix this. For instance, the Galil had a ambidextrous safety with a little thing on the side that you could flick, though it's not very easy to actuate, but that's the way it did it. It was designed, fully automatic versions of this are set up that the automatic setting is right kind of here above the semi, so you would go safe, full, and then all the way down to semi. The reason why they did that was so that if you were caught in a panic, and you just slammed it down, and you're now nervous, you're frizzed up, your adrenaline's going, you're not gonna just sit there. It prevents you from spraying and praying, and it makes you realize, oh shit, I'm on single fire, oh shit, I need to actually pay attention to where I'm aiming. And so then they have to actually physically bring it back up to do that, or specifically put it on full auto in the first place. Is a neat design. The gun is a little heavy in terms of modern standards. Back in the day, it was heavier with the AK-47 since it was milled. The AKMs are a little tiny bit lighter. I would say that this thing in its current configuration is just a hair heavier than the AR, so it's not that big of a difference, but they are heavier on average. And the main drawback and the main pro of this gun is the bolt in the gas system. It's what gives it its strengths and what gives it its weaknesses. The gun is hard to control when firing, especially in full auto, and that's because the bolt is this big hunk of fucking metal that sits in here, and what it does is it comes back like that, all the way back, and every time you shoot it, you have this big hunking piece of metal. Oh right, I have a thing chambered in there, and not chambered around. There's this big hunking piece of metal oscillating back and forth, beating the shit out of you every time it comes back. And since it's big and beefy, it's also heavier than a normal, or than some other bolt designs, and it adds weight. But that weight and that aggressiveness of the gas system is precisely what makes it so reliable in the first place. It doesn't matter if there's mud in the action, it doesn't matter what the hell's going on. You have a lot of gas coming through here, more so than on other rifles, like an AR, and you have the piston, the bolt goes from about right here on the rifle to all the way here. There's a piston that goes that entire length. I can actually show you by taking this apart. This entire bolt is pretty hefty. Like, you could, if you use this as a weapon, you could, hurt someone with this fucking thing. And the piston goes all the way forward to where the gas bucket is. That means that once this thing gets moving, it's not only got the gas pushing it, but it's also got a lot of inertia. It's stored in this big bolt. So you get a lot of gas up front that initially gets this thing moving, but then that inertia keeps it moving through pretty much everything. Dirt, whatever the fuck else, bad ammo, it just doesn't give a shit. It just goes. An AR uses a tiny little gas tube. In fact, I can show you. If I can get this thing back on, I can show you. The AR directly to the gas system. Either way, basically the way it works, it's a tiny little tube that goes from right here all the way. Uses a direct impingement gas system, I think that's what it's called. Either way, basically the way it works, you have this tiny little tube that goes from right here all the way back, and there's a little tiny piston right on the bolt that's about yay long that interfaces with that port, and what happens is the gas comes from here, travels all the way back, and then touches the piston and actuates the system. It's specifically designed to be the failure point of the weapon. When it gets too hot, the first thing to go is that tube, which means that the gun will not outright fail. Well, I mean, it will outright fail, but basically, if you're in a combat situation and your gun's getting really fucking hot, and it's getting so hot to the point where it's going to damage the gun, the first thing to get damaged is the gas system, which means your semi-automatic capabilities will be gone, but then you still have the capability of using the rifle. You just have to chamber each round individually instead of being able to just keep pulling the trigger. Either way, that's a problem that the AK-47 will never have, because the AK-47 doesn't give a shit. It's like the Honey Badger. It don't give a fuck. It just keeps going. The piston is, there's a lot more metal there to soak up heat, so it can go for longer. It can just handle more heat in general, and it's just there's videos of people fucking shooting these things, thousands of rounds through these things, and the barrel will droop down, like visibly droop from like a straight barrel to like angled it down slightly, and it will still fucking go. It doesn't care. The AK-47 don't care. It just doesn't. And that's the beauty of this rifle, is that it really, in at the end of the day, which one of these rifles do I really like is gonna better, rely on? It's gonna be this one. This thing is something I know I can rely on, and if it does give me any troubles, you just beat the shit out of it. You got a stuck chamber? Bring a hammer to it. It doesn't give a fuck. It just doesn't care. And it will keep going and going and going with little to no maintenance, with no complaints. And that's the legacy that this gun has created, and why, in my mind, it has a little bit more value than an AR, because it's so goddamn reliable. The other thing that I like more about this setup than an AR is not only is the control simple and reliable, but the cartridge itself is bigger, and it has a little bit more stopping power. It's not moving quite as fast, but it has, that essentially means what it hits is going to be in for longer and transfer more energy. So you're going to get a lot more energy transfer out of this than a 5.56, just because there's more surface area on the bullet to do so. It doesn't have quite as much velocity, so it's not quite as, it doesn't have quite as much, like, it doesn't have quite as speed, which means if you have a big chest rig with a lot of body armor, it's not going to go through that quite as well, but it does have more power, especially up close, and it's going to get stopped. The AR bullet is going to get stopped sooner in like a tree or something, because it will just, it has a less overall energy in the bullet to, transfer. So, which is in my mind why this gun kind of won Vietnam, is not only was it super simple, super reliable, and you didn't really have to care about cleaning it, the bullet itself was better in a jungle situation, for that kind of dense jungle where you really just need that energy to blast through that shit into whoever the fuck else is on the other side. That, I think, is one of the main reasons why this thing was so successful. It's also, the other thing is it was so successful is because in desert climates, it was very reliable. You can get sand all up in here. It doesn't care. It'll just keep going. But the main reason why it's the most popular rifle in the world is because Russia had a lot of money in the 50s and had a lot of power and could just mass produce these fuckers en masse. And so a lot of the reason why you see these in the Middle East and other countries is because Russia was fucking giving them away. Just, oh, you like communism a little bit? Have a pallet of 1,000 AKs. Just fuck it. If you align with us, we give you AKs. That's how it goes. So then you have a whole fuck ton of these things around for super fucking cheap, which is why they're so prevalent today. And not only that, they last for fucking ever. So they're like genuinely the honey badgers of the fucking gun world. They're just so they're just cool. Other than that, they're just cool. I just like the aesthetic better than an AR, to be honest with you. But yeah, this specific rifle was my first ever gun that I got, and it's what got me into guns. So this specific one is probably one of my most prized possessions because it means so much to me. Specifically, when I talk about moving, I always think about, can I have my 30 round mag? Can I have my AK in its current configuration? Because if I can't, I'm not moving there. Because the AK means so much to me emotionally because of what it's helped me get through personally, which I know is ironic, but fuck it. It's gotten me through a lot of tough times, ironically, and is kind of always been there for me when I feel bad. Like, I still have my AK, which is weird. But it is what it is, and I love this gun. And so when I talk about ARs versus AK, I'm a little tiny bit biased, but the AK-47, what else can you say about it?